Welcome to another episode of Steele Creek Explorer. I'm your host, Jeremy Stout. You may remember a few months ago we introduced you to some of the spring wildflowers, some of the very quick, ephemeral wildflowers. And indeed, most folks, when they think of wildflowers, they think of springtime. Few people really think of the fall as a time to find beautiful wildflowers. But indeed, many of our wildflowers, both native and introduced to our region, only bloom in the fall. So this time of year is the best time to find those fall wildflowers. So let's explore around the Nature Center and in Steele Creek Park and see what kind of fall bloomers we can find this year. A great place to start your adventure looking for fall wildflowers is right around the Nature Center. We have a number of gardens that are maintained by the Friends of Steele Creek Nature Center and Park, and these are meant to bring in biodiversity, both in the plants that are here, but also in butterflies and other pollinators. Whether it be the butterfly bush, which is a wonderful plant. It's not a strict fall wildflower. It blooms almost all warm season long. But many of the others, this is a great place to first start your adventures learning about fall wildflowers, both native and some that are introduced from elsewhere. Black-eyed Susans are a favorite among gardeners in our region. This beautiful little fall wildflower occurs in a lot of sunny places. It's a favorite pollinator for a lot of bees and wasps, and especially some of our butterflies who like the high perch when they drink. One thing you might notice though is those bristly hairs all over the stems makes it virtually impossible for ants to climb up into the flower to try to devour it. It's an excellent adaptation for keeping adverse species away. The asters are an incredibly diverse group of flowers, nearly all of which bloom in the fall. Many of them are white, but some can be blue, or in this case, purple, as in the New England aster. All of the asters are noticeable because they have a large number of petals, not just 5 or 7, but they actually have numerous radiating from the central whorl. New England aster is especially important as being a very late bloomer, so it allows a very late nectar source for many migratory butterflies, such as monarchs, before they begin their journey to Central America. No, these flowers don't have missing parts. 2 noticeable blue leaves up at the top is a good indicator that you're looking at the Asiatic dayflower. As the name might suggest, this is not a native wildflower. It was introduced here from Asia, but still makes for a nice food plant for many of our nectar-feeding insects. This is common both in gardens and also in the wild. This is a native variety of phlox. This is smooth phlox, also called garden phlox, and this is a very important food source, not just for butterflies, but hummingbirds love it as well. One of my absolute favorite fall wildflowers are the jewelweeds. There are 2 different species that occur in our area, and most commonly in the Bristol region is what's called spotted jewelweed. This is a plant that when it blooms, it has these bright orange flowers with these noticeably darker orange spots on the inside. Another species, pale jewelweed, has yellow flowers and more often grows at slightly higher elevations than we tend to have here at Steele Creek Park and the surrounding area. This plant is oftentimes found growing in shady areas, sometimes in dense woods, but almost always very close to a water source. This is a plant that likes to keep its feet wet. It keeps its roots underground in wet areas. Now, many folks don't know this plant as jewelweed. Of course, it gets that name because of the jewel-like flowers that hang down much like a jewel might hang from a necklace. But most folks around here know these plants by the name touch-me-nots. These can either be called the pale touch-me-nots, like the yellow jewelweed, or these are called spotted touch-me-nots, or spotted jewelweed, and we'll show you the really neat way that they get that name. People refer to them as touch-me-nots because of some very interesting seed dispersal mechanisms they have. Here in the fall, when their seeds are fully mature and ready to go into the ground to germinate, they develop inside these pods, as you can see. And as the pods ripen, they start to get stripes on the outside of the pod that tell you they're ready to go. And when you touch them, you see how they earn that name. The pods actually explode, and in some cases they can throw those seeds 5 or 10 feet away. It's an excellent way for the plant to get its seeds far away where they might have a better chance of growing. Another great place to check out some of our fall wildflowers is right here in our native grassland. This is a really neat little living science experiment. You can find it close to the Civitan shelter in the park, just up from Steele Creek, very close to our disc golf course. We've introduced this to you before for its diversity of small mammals. Many birds can be found here in the grassland that aren't often found elsewhere in the park, and especially the wildflowers, both spring, but especially the fall ones. We're going to introduce you to some of those right now. Giant goldenrod is a beautiful fall wildflower that unfortunately has attained something of a bad reputation. Many folks with seasonal allergies blame the goldenrod for a lot of their complaints. As you can see here though, goldenrod has a sticky pollen that is mostly pollinated by bees and wasps and other flying insects. Unfortunately, it largely takes the blame for the common ragweed, which is blooming very nearby and does have pollen that is taken by the wind. Well, we've already introduced you to the purple-colored New England aster. As I mentioned before, asters are a very diverse group of wildflowers, and you can find these in nearly every habitat in the fall. This variety is white heath aster. From a distance, it may look something like a daisy, but daisies have a much fewer number of petals than the asters do. Now, one interesting fact about the asters is you can tell the pollinators of an aster by the color of its flowers. Most of the white asters tend to be pollinated by bees, wasps, and hornets. The purple and the blue asters tend to be pollinated by butterflies. Well, as I mentioned earlier with the goldenrod, this is the real culprit to many of those fall allergy sufferers. Common ragweed blooms in the fall, oftentimes in the same habitat and right alongside the giant goldenrod. And this is oftentimes what is causing the inflammation and allergic reactions in many pollen sufferers. And as you notice here, these little clusters on top, from a distance they look almost like seeds or something, but we mention them here because these are actual wildflowers. Now, you don't recognize them right away as such because they are green flowers. They oftentimes are very greenish in appearance. And that's very much a departure from the norm for most flowers of the world. Because as we mentioned on the show before, most flowers have a very close relationship with pollinizing insects and other animals. Ragweed, which just depends on the wind to pick up its pollen and transport it elsewhere, doesn't have to spend any energy creating beautiful and showy and brightly colored flowers. Just plain green flowers, the wind doesn't care. It'll pick up the pollen and carry it nonetheless. Tick seed sunflowers are a beautiful addition to check on any of your wildflower lists. This is a very showy yellow flower whose seeds are a very important food source for a lot of creatures, including northern bobwhites and many of our grassland bird species. It would be easy to confuse this wildflower with Queen Anne's lace from a distance, but this is late flowering thoroughwort, also called late flowering boneset. This plant forms beautiful clusters of showy white flowers. Well, as we've learned and seen today, there's plenty of diversity to be found in our region's fall wildflowers. And of course, we at the Nature Center would like to invite you to do your own explorations. A great place to start that is at the Steele Creek Park Nature Center. We're open 7 days a week. We'll be happy to let you peruse some of our field guides if you're having trouble with your own identifications, because sometimes they can be a little bit tricky. But whether it's here at Steele Creek or some of our other area parks, be sure to get out there and explore them yourself, because that's where you can be the explorer.